Hi. Hi, how are you? Good. Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know if it was told or not. So I was gonna look.
How you doing? Did you weekend?
Wish it wasn't over.
I know. Make sure I have my watch out.
Just super negative.
Always fun. This is a long one. I always forget.
Yeah, it's a long one, but nothing too crazy.
No, there's not a impressive one. It's just.
It wasn't changed. So that should be interesting.
I know. Yes. Well,
I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Willoughby Eastlake Board of Education here at 35353 Curtis Boulevard in Eastlake, Ohio. Mr. Charnelli, will you call the roll?
Mr. Merhar?
Here.
Mr. Roskis?
Here.
Mrs. Newyear?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Dr. Beal?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is the superintendent question and answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beal. So last month, we had two speakers who came and commented on previous speakers that had come before the board. Neither of the speakers had a question, but rather just wanted to share their concerns. And we'd like to thank them for coming and presenting to the board and the community. It's always good to hear from people in the community, so thank you.
Great. Next section is public comment. Mr. Charnelli, do we have any speakers tonight?
We do.
As usual, let me get this real quick. I just want to remind everyone that the public comment of this section of the Board of Education meeting is in order for the public to be able to make comments. We ask that it be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. If you have any group affiliation, we will ask you to give your name, address, and group affiliation before you speak. The part of the comment section is that you would always address the president of the board during your speaking, not individual members of the board or individual staff members. Mr. Charnelli, who is our first speaker?
Frank Kunstl.
Good evening. My name is Frank Kunstl. I live at 131 Seabourn Drive in Willowick. I'd like to address some comments that have been made in previous board meetings about the inclusion of race in the curriculum. I've been a social studies teacher in the public schools, and I have a graduate degree in curriculum and instruction. First, I applaud parents who have come to board meetings to register their concerns and to stand up for their students. I think that's great, and I think it serves the board well. Second, I believe that teachers who create guilt and shame in students need corrective coaching and better direction. This is not a curriculum problem, it's an instruction problem. Having said that, I encourage in the curriculum a full account of our history, our successes and achievements, our creation of perhaps the greatest country on earth, but also our problems and flaws as we continue to strive to create an even better country. Part of public schools' responsibility is to help students become good citizens, including social aspects of life. Employers want this, communities need this. That includes helping students understand current issues and employ critical thinking. Race is one of the social issues that schools must address because it's a factor in our society. This includes teaching students about the progress that has been made and also the distance we have yet to travel. This issue will exist whether we include it in the curriculum or not. I am puzzled about how this issue can be addressed without ever uttering the words racial justice or systemic racism. To do that would be like trying to teach about climate change without ever using the word carbon, or to try to talk about the Second Amendment rights without using the word gun. I'm also concerned about the use of the word divisive to censor classroom instruction. I certainly don't want to see school taking actions that create hostility and conflict among students. And I don't know anyone who does. But I also think that some people want to avoid any meaningful discussion of racial issues and use the term divisive to exclude all such discussion. I would rather have professional educators helping students learn about racial issues than leave it up to individuals to try to figure out all by themselves. Yes, sometimes this may be uncomfortable, but it should not be traumatic. Good teachers help students navigate their discomfort and resolve it. Learning to understand another's viewpoint is essential to working with others and to living with others. It's not divisive to learn that people have different experiences and different points of view. This is how society is constructed. So I encourage the board to support thoughtful and realistic explorations of racial issues, just as they should for all other sensitive issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trinella, who is our next speaker?
Marcita Ferguson.
Hello, Marcita Ferguson of 66 Stockwell. I am the founder of Black Lives Matter Lake County, and I didn't get to finish last week, so I didn't write something out. I just came to speak from my heart. I applaud the man what he said in regards to diversity being taught in the schools. I think people need to understand that race is taught in the schools. We, as Black people, only hear about the white race. We need to start looking at history and literature, all of the things that we are teaching our kids in school, and start looking at it from the eyes of people of color and the marginalized communities. While I was in school, I never learned anything about Shirley Chisholm. We get 28 days out of 365, and I don't understand how people could think that's enough to learn about our history. This world doesn't even understand what we came from in Africa. We were brought here. If we're talking about the realistic versions of history, we should mention the fact that Lincoln spoke and said that he would gratefully save the Union and not free the slaves if he could. That he talked about our very existence in this country was dividing the country, but we were brought here against our own free will. These are not things that our kids do not get to learn, but this is their history. So while people are very afraid of what this looks like, racism for Black people is learned in school. That is the first time we encounter it. So if we as 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds can encounter racism, learn in school that our skin color is considered ugly, our hair is considered ugly, and that we are considered dirty and poor, then young kids can learn about diversity and what it means that this is not the right way to look at life. They can learn about these things, equity and inclusion. So I beg of you guys to continue the work that you're doing. This is great work, and our kids deserve for this to be heard. They deserve to be able to be seen. They deserve to see people that looks like them that have changed this country, but not just in the help. You know, there are so many different areas in which Black people have made great accomplishments for this country, and no one ever talks about it. And our kids get to live a reality that they do not matter, that they were brought here as slaves, and then they were saved and freed by white people. They don't get to learn about how we fought for our rights in this country. And I think that you guys need to really consider that when we're teaching our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trinella?
Stacy McGuinn.
Hi, I'm Stacy McGuigan, 36260 Valley Vista Drive in Eastlake. Last month, I attended the board's June 23rd work session, and during that session, the board unanimously voted to authorize the hiring of an outside investigator without any discussion at all. As a taxpayer and a parent in the district, I would like to know the following. What is this investigator for? What is the cost of the investigator? Who will be paying for this investigator? And if it is the district, what fund will this money come out of? And finally, is there or could there be litigation involved? If we're looking to get a levy renewal passed in November of this year, it's truly imperative that you're transparent. And in the interest of transparency, I would really appreciate an answer on this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know that the matters of personnel are supposed to be discussed during a board meeting, but if you'll give us your contact information, we will definitely answer you.
But the cost part isn't like, I'm not asking for you to divulge anybody's name.
Mhm.
I'm asking, as taxpayer, if this is for a personnel matter, then it's for a personnel matter.
Right.
What is the cost going to be? Where's the money coming from? Is there a lawsuit involved?
At this point, I don't believe there's a lawsuit involved. The cost of it will depend on how many hours the investigator needs to work. And it comes, I believe, any money for an investigation comes from what, the general fund? Yes. So those are the as much as I can give you that's specific.
Thank you.
Our last speaker is Steve Tolbert.
Good evening. My name is Steve Tolbert. I live at 32894 Kimberly Court in Eastlake. And I understand that one of the topics on the agenda is tonight is regarding the mandating of requiring the students to wear masks in class. And I've read a lot of studies that say that school-age children have such a minuscule chance of catching the coronavirus and even same amount of even to spread it. And I've also read a lot of studies that say it's actually more harmful to kids breathing their own carbon dioxide all day long while in class. So my appeal here tonight is to have you either not mandate school-age children to be masked or at least keep it optional. Thank you.
If you stick around for the rest of the meeting, I think that will be discussed.
Okay.
And Mr. General, is that the end of the speakers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of June 10th, 2021. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. President,
Mr. Murray?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from June 10th.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Do I hear a second? Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Mr. President, I second that motion.
Great. Is there any discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. New Year?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
The next item is the approval of the minutes of June 14th, 2021. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President,
Mrs. New Year?
I move to approve the minutes of June 14th, 2021.
Thank you, Mrs. New Year. Do I hear a second? Mr. Murhart?
Second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Murhart. Is there any discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. New Year?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Next item on the agenda, item 3C, is the approval of the minutes of June 23rd, 2021. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Roskis.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes of June 23rd, 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second? Mrs.
Mr.
New Year?
President, I second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. New Year?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Mr. Charnello?
All right. First thing, want to discuss the fair school funding formula passing. So while there was an increase in funding, we are a capped district, and we have been for 8 years. So the increase that we did recognize was 40% of what we've been capped year after year for 8 years.
Nick, can you explain what capped means?
It means what we should have been funded, however, the state didn't have enough money. So they viewed us as a wealthy district, so the schools that were smaller and couldn't raise taxes were guaranteed and given first priority. And then you have a second tier, which is funded at their proper level, and then you have cap districts, which is what they viewed as, well, if we don't give you enough money, you're still going to be okay. So, thankfully, this next formula addresses that and is restoring some of our funding
So they've restored 40% of our
of our cap.
cap.
Yes,
So we're still 60% under our cap.
correct. I just wanted to address that. I know that was the topic that came out last week. The financial report, letter A. This was a little tricky of a year just because of various federal ESSER funds and student wellness and success funds. So while our expenses may look low, that's because different funding sources paid for them. We really came in around 97% of the year, had the general fund paid for all of it. So we did come under budget, however, it is more under budget just because of different COVID relief funds and student wellness and success funds.
Nick, can you explain what ESSER funds are as well?
As coronavirus relief funds.
So what's I think really important to note from the ESSER funds or the coronavirus funds, they're one-time funds. So what they do is they shoot up your 5-year forecast, inflate it, but as quickly as it inflates it, it deflates because the following year that money's gone. So I would caution people not to look at that as that's the panacea to fix school funding. It's not. We're in a better position than we were because we're at least 40% of our formulated total funding, but we're nowhere near what we should be receiving from the state. And we'll take the COVID money, don't get me wrong, but it is just a one-time shot in the arm. Just like if you were to get a commission check from your job for $2,000, you wouldn't budget that you're going to get that every month. You got it once.
Letter B is the final amended appropriations for fiscal '21. This is a year-end closing process step for the auditors, and it is for your approval.
And that's not a part of the consent agenda, so do I hear a motion to approve item 4B, final amended appropriations for fiscal year 2021?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'll make a
Rasmussen.
motion to approve item 4B, final amended appropriations for fiscal year 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second? Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you. Do I hear any discussion? Mr. General?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Charnel?
Letter C, this is the second resolution for a $8.75 million 10-year emergency renewal. This is a renewal that will be placed on the November agenda or November ballot.
And this does not increase taxes, correct?
Correct, no new taxes,
It's no change what we've been doing.
no changes.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 4C, renewal levy resolution? Mr. Jones?
Oh, sorry, Kyle.
Oh, Mrs. Newyear?
I move to approve 4C renewal levy resolution.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyear. Do I hear a second? Mr. Murhart?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Murhart. Is there any discussion? Mr. Charnel?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Charnel?
Letter 4D, this is a debt refunding issue for a COBS fund that we had in 2014. As we all know, interest rates are rather low right now, and this will save us about $55,000 per year in interest.
Great. Do I hear a motion to approve item 4D, debt refunding? Mr. Jones.
Mr. President, I motion to approve item 4D, debt refunding.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear a second? Mr. Maher?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Do I hear discussion?
Nice job, Nick.
Exactly. Mr. Challen?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Challen?
Letter E is an agreement with SCView Master Services Agreement. This is a paperless solution. We've had a lot of discussion about going paperless and moving that direction. And after a lot of discussions and meeting with my office, we've decided to move forward or recommend moving forward with SCView Strategic Solutions.
Great. Do I hear a motion to approve item 4E, SCView Master Services Agreement? Mr. Roskis?
Mr. President, I will make a motion to approve item 4E, SC View Master Services Agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second? Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you. Do I hear discussion? Go ahead.
Nick, what kind of timeline do you think this will entail to get everything paperless?
We plan on going effective August 1st, and then we'll start building out from there. So it's only going to impact my office, so it's not going to resonate throughout the district. So they seem eager. Hopefully by the end of August, they have a good grasp on a lot of it, but we'll probably get 80% of the way there by the end of August, and then from there there's modules that you can keep building out and adding forms individually. So
Will this ultimately save money or just improve efficiencies? What's the purpose in it?
Storage for files. Well, we did have a fire, and we lost some records. So that prevent that from happening in the future, we do have a designated room just for files. So we don't have to worry about files, shredding, anything like that. Everything will be electronic. Easy to retrieve, so that way our staff efficiency, instead of looking through filing cabinets, they could just search through the system. We'll save on paper, we'll save on ink, just because we're not printing as much. So there are lots of efficiencies and cost savings just in terms of supplies and ink and stuff like that.
So will these files be stored locally, like within the district?
Cloud-based.
Cloud-based, okay.
Yeah.
And then those recurring costs will be continuous, correct? Like with this agreement?
Yeah, they charge, I believe, 1 cent per page, and then just the annual agreement.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Challen?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Challen?
Letter 4F is Trans World System Service Agreement. This is an outside third party to assist us with achieving collection of fees.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 4F, Trans World Systems Service Agreement? Mrs. Newyear?
Mr. President, I move to approve item 4F, Trans World Systems Service Agreement.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyear. Do you hear a second? Mr. Maher?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Maher. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Challen?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Challen?
Letter 4G. This is Bonefish Systems. This helps detect fraud, whether that be vendors that are blacklisted by the state of Ohio, that we shouldn't be doing business with, duplicate invoices, duplicate purchase orders, duplicate checks, anything like that. It's an added layer of protection for the district.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 4G, Bonefish Systems Fraud Products Service Agreement? Mr. Maher?
I'll make a motion to approve, what is this,
4G.
4G.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Mr.
Roskis?
President, I will second that motion.
Thank you very much. Do I hear discussion? So again, this is just an added layer of protection for checking
Correct.
for fraud. Okay. Mr. Challen?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Mr. Chao.
Letter 4H, as we are now entering fiscal 22 school year, so this is just an annual item establishing petty cash funds throughout the district at each building. These are small emergency purchases that, and Nancy could probably talk more about why you would use a petty cash fund.
Sure. What do you want to know?
So, just an annual item, and this is just giving the authority to establish those limits at those buildings, as well as their designee. Letter 4I, this is establishing change funds. This is for the North and South High School athletic departments. So similar to petty cash, however, this is, to make change for gates and athletic fence. 4J, another annual item. This is for travel outside of the district. It addresses hotels, meal reimbursement, and then the IRS mileage rate. 4K, this is a relatively long list of blanket certificates that is due to it starting a new fiscal year. You have a lot of your utility blankets out there, and just some of you could see a lot of fuel, utilities, some larger transportation, some tuition bills. That's mainly what we're doing, creating those purchase orders for the new fiscal year.
And just to note for the board, you'll notice Echo Lawn, which is, I think, the first item that's listed. That's an outsourcing service, so why would we outsource that? Because you have to be certified to use those chemicals, and we don't have anyone that's certified to use those chemicals, and it's significantly cheaper for us to outsource that than to try to in-house that service. So we've done that for a number of years, but it's important to note, I think, when we outsource something, what the purpose is.
So is that something like pesticides?
Yeah, it's all the killing of weeds, et cetera, around fencing, that sort of thing.
4L, these are transfers from the general fund. The first is $3,600 for unclaimed funds. These are checks that we've written that are about a year old and have never been cashed. So no one wanted to cash their check.
Wow, okay.
The next one is $1 million transfer to our self-insurance fund. Our reserves were very low. We got an audit funding last year just because of how low our reserves were, and part of this is we're going to transfer $1 million into that fund to stabilize it. Letter 4M, this is a transfer from the unclaimed funds back to the general fund. These individuals have been notified, and these unclaimed funds are 5 years old. And they still do not want their money. Letter 4N, you cannot have a negative balance with federal grants at the end of the fiscal year. And the way federal grants are, you spend them down and then you request to get the money after the fact. So those balances are historically negative. So we are just advancing those monies into those grants, and then we'll bring them back next month. 4O, these are just budget purpose and goal statements for the fiscal 22 school year. And 4P, we have a donation from Daniel Height. He donated a 2002 Mercedes-Benz to NCI Willoughby's Auto Tech program. And Buckeye Relief LLC donated $30,100 to the district to go towards a new power gate at the transportation garage's exit drive.
So what's the purpose of that second one? Is that tied to anything? Or-
Yes.
I think they did the donation separate.
Yeah, the donation's separate, but that's the space, the right behind us, and you'll see later in the agenda, sale of land. So we need that power gate to get our buses in and out.
Okay, that's the end of the treasurer's report. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 5, the superintendent resolutions.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item A is the American Rescue Plan, and that's the last gentleman who spoke. It speaks to exactly what you asked. So currently the CDC, this is as of July 9th, that's the latest information that I have available. Currently the CDC has pushed out recommendations for school. We're still waiting to get clarification from our local health departments. But as some of you may know, we currently run summer school. We are not running masks at summer school currently. We allow parents to make that decision as to whether or not they choose to have their student wear a mask or not wear a mask, and same with our staff. The majority of our staff are vaccinated unless they chose not to be vaccinated. That is not something that we track specifically, nor will we track parents or students specifically. The CDC recommendation is if you are fully vaccinated, then you do not need to wear a mask. Their recommendation is, this is in classrooms, and that's important to know. This is in classrooms because there is one exception to this from the CDC at this point. But if they are not vaccinated, the CDC says they should. But however, Willoughby Eastlake is leaving that up to the discretion of each family. That is our intent. There'll be the reason you haven't seen a resolution is because we're waiting as long as we can. I don't know what's going to happen. I think we all understand that at this point moving forward. So far we've had good luck in our summer schools. We haven't seen spread. And we do know that, as was pointed out earlier, especially our students under 12 are very unlikely to be long-term negatively affected. Now there is spread. We've seen spread. The CDC still says that there could be quarantining, for example, if we have an outbreak in a school. So that's still a possibility as we understand it today, subject to change. But I do want to read to you what the CDC does say about, and again, I'm not sure what the local health board's going to recommend. This is just CDC. CDC is saying that CDC orders apply to all public transportation, conveyance including school buses, regardless of the mask policy at school. Passengers and drivers must wear a mask on school buses, and then it goes on. So currently our summer school kids that ride buses are wearing masks, but when they get to school they can remove them. Currently, as you can see, that is a CDC mandate. We'll wait for the interpretation of the governor, if we get one, or the interpretation of the local health department. So as it stands right now, I would, unless something changes, I would suspect that students will be required to wear a mask on the bus, but not at school and not outdoors, unless they choose to. Does that make it clear? Okay. Item B for your consideration is the Ohio Extended, oh, I'm sorry, we have to vote on that, I'm sorry.
And the American Rescue Plan is posted on our website?
It is posted on our website, correct, and submitted.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5A, American Rescue Plan? Mr. Maher?
I'll make a motion to approve item 5A, the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Maher. Do I hear a second? Mr. Jones?
I second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there a further discussion?
I think I do want to point out that you as board members on, I believe our next meeting's August 9th. That's when there'll be an actual agenda item for you to approve related to masks.
Okay.
So expect that will come unless something radically changes between now and then. My recommendation would be what you just heard.
Sure.
All right. Any further discussion? Mr. Charnell?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item B for your consideration is the Ohio Extended Learning Plan. That consists of a lot of the things we're doing from gathering information and data about where our students are, because we know there's going to be learning gaps. I think everyone understands that. So we need to identify where those are. We started that process in the spring where we identified certain students and encourage them to come to our summer school. We also open that up to students who were not specifically identified, but that we'll be running that over the course of the next couple of years, and these funds cover that, and that plan has been submitted to the state.
All right, do I hear a motion to approve item 5B, Ohio Extended Learning Plan?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'll
Roskis.
make a motion to approve item 5B, Ohio Extended Learning Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do I hear a second, Mrs. Neer?
Yes, I will second.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a discussion? Mr. Charnell?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item C for your consideration is a one-year renewal of our contract with Chartwells for the 21-22 school year. It's important to note also, this past year, lunches were free, breakfasts were free across the all student body. That's already been approved by the government to continue all through next year. So we will continue to do that, and I think that's been incredibly helpful to a lot of families. And as you know, the lines in our food distribution would sometimes wrap all the way out, all the way down Psalm Center. So these were some really long lines of a lot of families who were in need. So I think it's great that we're going to be able to continue to do that. So Chartwells will lead us through that again for the following school year.
Great.
Now, there is one downside to this, though. We've seen the number of free and reduced applications dropping. And why is that important, that people still need to fill out their free and reduced lunch applications? Well, number one, it applies to fees as well. But secondly, it drives all of our funding. And you heard Nick say, and that formula, that funding formula that brings money in from the state is based on the fact that they interpret us as wealthy, even though we have somewhere near 40% free and reduced lunch counts. So we have it all here, the extremely wealthy, as you know, all the way to kids in poverty. So we really need to encourage our parents that it's important that they still fill those applications out for, not just for us from a school funding perspective, although that's significant, but also for them as far as fees go for their students in the classrooms.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve item 5C, food service renewal contract with Chartwells for the 2021-2022 school year? Mr. Murray?
I'll make a motion to approve the renewal food service agreement with Chartwell.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a second? Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I second that motion.
Thank you. Is there further discussion?
I just wanted to make sure, I was reading through it, we did get them, I guess, as far as Chartwell's to agree, going forward to make sure we use all of the
Commodity funds.
commodity funds.
Yeah.
Because I know that was a big issue when we did the audit earlier.
Yeah, so I had multiple conversations. There's an initial allocation. They have promised to spend 100% of that. And then there's a reallocation, which is a second pot, and they are doing 70% of that. So they'll at least spend that much, but their goal is to spend it all, but they'll guarantee 100% and
Gotcha.
70%.
Perfect.
Any further discussion? Mr. Chandler?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item D is a resolution approving the sale of the property, which I spoke about earlier. That is the property that is connected or adjacent to the transportation, where we store all of our buses, transportation department. And the company's called Buckeye Relief. So that's a parcel of land that we were not using. So we brokered a deal with them to sell that property. And we haven't used that property for anything educationally, I don't believe, ever. It's just sitting there. So, and then that is also where the gate comes into play.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5D, resolution approving the sale of real property associated with permanent parcel number 34-A-001-0-00-00-2-0 to the city of Eastlake and authorizing the board to enter into a purchase agreement to effectuate the sale?
I think I missed one of those numbers.
Do Thanks, Mr. Jones.
Mr. President, I motion to approve item 5D, resolution approving the sale of real property.
Thank you.
Good place to
Mr.
stop.
Jones, do I hear a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Merhar. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Charnell?
Mr. Merhar?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item E for your consideration is a contract with Crossroads Health Service Agreement. It is a 2-year agreement, and I understand that there are some concerns contractually in some of the details, but I want to cover with you what the plan is, because I would still request that we approve this contract now, even though there are some questions, and I'll address those in just a minute. The reason being, if we don't move forward now, we will not have an opportunity to have mental health workers in place by the start of the school year, which is going to be difficult to build anyway. As you all know, everywhere you drive, you see a sign on every business across the entire state saying, we're hiring, and it's no different in mental health. It's actually very difficult to find those people. So I'd like to move forward, but what you will see is an addendum that will be on the August board agenda, and it's going to address a couple of things. It's going to change that 5-month out clause to 4 months. Now, it's extended from what our original contract was, because if you remember, we were the originators of this whole idea that's now blown into all of Lake County. So when we were the first contract that they drafted, and they discovered that put them in a pretty difficult spot in terms of how to pay their employees, et cetera, when the out clause was so short. So that's a compromise. I don't think we can do better than that. You will not see better than 4 months out clause. So, I'm going to, the insurance question, Mr. Merhar, I'm going to sit down with you, and we're going to iron through that if we could do.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
get it done.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a question about the total cost. The total cost is really pretty simple. If it's fully staffed, that's $48,000 per staff member in year 1. That includes their benefits, their retirement, their salary, et cetera, et cetera. We can't hire them independently on our own for less than that. It would be significantly more than that, most likely. The second year, and that equals $288,000. The second year of the contract is $300,000, which is at $50,000 per employee. These are being funded. Can you talk just briefly about where this funding's coming from?
Sure. We mentioned COVID relief funds, mentioned the American Rescue Plan. That is, as everyone gets stimulus dollars, the school also got stimulus dollars, and that is the American Rescue Plan. Those are one-time funds, and we are using those one-time funds for these mental health services.
So, I'm sure there's some folks that are in the community that that's a $588,000 contract over a 2-year time period. And that is certainly not chump change, but I would tell you that before we started this program, this is before COVID, when I went and talked to teachers in the buildings and staff members in the buildings, and this resonated from secretarial staff all the way through to teacher aides to teachers in the classroom. Consistently, the number one challenge teachers said they faced were mental health issues manifesting themselves in different ways in classrooms. And while that may not directly impact your child, if you have a student in your classroom who's having a lot of mental health issues, it will impact your child if they're in that class. So we want to do the best we can to help these kids. Now throw COVID on top of that, and we know that we've created significantly more stressors for these students. There's going to be kids that are going to come back and they're going to be academically behind. It's going to be incredibly stressful as they move into state testing, and et cetera, et cetera. So we want to do the best that we can to provide these services to our students, and we simply don't have the means to do what we need to do. And so we're going to do our best to address that issue. And then there were a couple of things that we had spoken about that are services provided by Crossroads that were not listed in the contract, and they include teacher training, administrator training, wellness and screening, crisis management, and a transitional youth and prevention services at no additional cost. So we're going to make sure that is also listed in the addendum of the contract. So I believe that covers every question except for the insurance question, which honestly I just didn't understand it well enough to be able to talk to Crossroads and interpret it. So that's an insurance guy, not me. So we're going to sit down and figure it out.
And then what about the licensure?
So licensure, good question. So they are going to come in August and explain that licensure to you. Everyone has a license, but there is it's much like, think of it in the world of, if you're more familiar with physical therapy, you have a physical therapist, you have a physical therapy assistant. Well, the physical therapy assistant cannot write plans, rehab plans, but they can execute them. So only a PT can write those plans. So the fully licensed can diagnose, create a treatment plan, and the others that are the lower level certificate can execute those plans. Yes, I would like to have all of them with the licensure, but the reality is those people are very, very difficult to find. So what we've added in the contract, so you still have control, is the ones that will be brought to you without your approval are fully licensed. But if someone is not fully licensed and they have these are degreed people still. They have college degrees, master's degrees. It's not like they're uneducated. They are educated in this field, but they haven't set for their state boards. So those individuals will be brought to the board for your approval.
So they are not state board licensed.
They are not state board licensed. They have another lesser degree license, just like a PTA still has a license,
Right.
but they don't have a license to write a therapy
They're
plan.
not independent.
That's correct. But so what they have to do is, let's say an unlicensed or not the fully licensed person's at Grant Elementary, for example. There's a crisis. This person will still intervene, but when it comes to diagnosis, we'll ship one of our licensed people over to do that, write the plan, and then the other person will execute it.
Okay.
So, but that will be dependent on your approval. We're going to try to bring as many licensed people as we can, but I think what it's going to boil down to is, are we better off with a person who has training and in there to assist us, or no one? And I think the answer is probably it's better to have someone in who's at least trained. And we did experience in our last round when we were with Crossroads, quite frankly, it was a mix of who was better at executing and interacting with kids anyways. It wasn't always that the licensed person was superior to,
right. That's
so they're going to come to August and explain this so you understand exactly what it is. This is not my field, this is their field. So they will be here in August, but anyone who does not hold that licensure, you will see their name appear and you'll have to approve that.
We're hiring 6, correct?
That's the goal.
And they will spread out throughout the district as needed?
Yes.
Depending on the needs?
They'll be assigned certain buildings, but if there is a crisis in a building, we make one phone call and move someone over.
But some of them will be covering, of course, more than one building. so-
Some of them will cover 2 buildings, correct. And we'll use our family liaisons to help augment that, because some buildings don't have family liaisons. We have 5 family liaisons, and they can't be everywhere either.
Right, right.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5E, Crossroads Health Service Agreement?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I'll make a motion to approve the Crossroads Health Service Agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do I hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Any further discussion? No. Mr. Chen?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item F for your consideration is the 21-22 service agreement with the Educational Service Center of the Western Reserve. This is something that you do each year, and there's a small number of specialized services that are provided by the ESC. So this is approving that.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5F, 2021-2022 service agreement with the Educational Service Center of the Western Reserve? Mrs. Newyer?
Mr. President, I move to approve item 5F, the 2021-22 service agreement with the Educational Service Center of the Western Reserve.
Thank you. Do we hear a second?
Mr. President, I will second that.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Charnella?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
I abstain.
Passes 4-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item G for your consideration is agreement with the Educational Funding Group. This is a technology-based contract. It's a recurring contract for the tech department.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5G, agreement with Educational Funding Group? Mr. Roskis?
Mr. President, I will make a motion to approve item 5G, agreement with Educational Funding Group.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis.
Mr.
Mrs. Newyer?
President, I second that.
Thank you very much. Do I hear any discussion? Mr. Charnella?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Item H for your consideration is the ratification of the tentative agreement with OPSI Local 163. That is primarily custodial and maintenance staff.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5H, ratification of the tentative agreement with OPSI Local 163? Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I motion to approve item, was it 5H?
Mm-hmm.
5H, ratification of the tentative agreement with OPSI Local 163.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do we hear a second? Mr. Murray? Thank you very much. Is there discussion? Mr. Charnella?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item I for your consideration is a memorandum of agreement with WIDA, that's the Teachers Association, for supplemental pay.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5I, memorandum of agreement with WIDA? Do you hear that motion? Mr. Maher?
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve the WIDA memorandum of agreement.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyer.
And specifically, what this is addressing is part-time employees,
Right.
because how we calculate their years. So you won't see next year, you'll see the following year.
Mhm.
Any other discussion? Mr. Charnella?
Mr. Merhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item J for your consideration is a memorandum of understanding with WIDA. Again, this is the teachers union. It is what's commonly called the spousal carve-out, which means spouses, if they can be covered 50% or greater at their place of employment, they must take their insurance from there and not from Willoughby Eastlake.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5J, memorandum of understanding with WIDA Insurance? Mrs.
Mr.
Newyer.
President, I move to approve item 5J, memorandum of understanding with WIDA Insurance.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyer. Do we hear a second?
Mr.
Murray?
President?
A second.
Thank you. Do we hear discussion?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that right. So what we're agreeing to here is if the spouse has an employer that is willing to offer insurance and pays at least 50% of the cost, they're ineligible for ours?
That's correct.
Gotcha.
And we've always done it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was reading that right.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit about how it wasn't really specified anywhere? And so it became Nick is doing a really, truly an outstanding job. He's digging up everything, and he found this, and it had been practiced, but nothing that had actually been put in writing.
The
And-
percentage wasn't spelled out, is that?
well, it was, but the best we could find was an old memorandum from
2006.
2006.
It was more of an FAQ.
So, I give a lot of credit also to Nancy and the other union leaders who were very reasonable in coming to a resolution on this issue as well.
Sure.
Okay. Further discussion? Mr. Channell?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item K is a memorandum of agreement with WIDA. This specifically addresses teachers that are teaching in the SAIL program, which is our autism program in Eastlake, at NCI Eastlake. And because of the way those students are bussed in and the way their day unfolds, these teachers do not get a lunch, which is contractually required. So what we have worked out an agreement with them, and this is ongoing, this is not new. We've been doing this for several years. We pay them in lieu of their lunch.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5K, memorandum of agreement with WIDA, Article 6, sale program?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I'll
Roskis.
make a motion to approve item 5K, memorandum of agreement with WIDA, Article 6 sale program.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Do we hear a second? Mr. Jones?
May I second that motion?
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any other discussion? Mr. Channell?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item L for your consideration is a memorandum agreement with WESEP, which is our secretarial and aid support personnel, and it is the exact same thing. Those that work at NCI Eastlake don't get their lunch in lieu of.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5L, memorandum of agreement with WESEP sale program? This is New Year.
Mr. President, I move to approve item 5L, memorandum of agreement with WESEP.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyear. Do we hear a second? Mr. Murhart?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Murhart. Is there any discussion? Mr. Channell?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Item M for your consideration is a memorandum of understanding with WESEP. This covers the insurance piece that we had just previously spoken about with WEDA.
So the same thing.
Same thing.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5M, memorandum of understanding with WESEP Insurance? Mr. Roskis?
President, I will make a motion to approve item 5M, memorandum of understanding with WESEP Insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Roskis. Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Channell?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Item N for your consideration is a memorandum of understanding with OPSI Local 159, that is food service. And obviously you're going to negotiate with unions singularly. And we ended up with an agreement that they ratified that probably would be seen as a loss, if you will, for that union. But then it wasn't consistent with the other unions, and it left them, I'm sure, feeling like they would be pretty singled out. So the administration offered through this agreement to rescind that which we had already negotiated, this piece, which was a requirement that they are in person on calamity days.
So this makes it uniform between the...
It stays consistent with all of our unions.
Okay.
Do we hear a motion to approve item 5N, memorandum of understanding with OPSI Local 159? Mrs. Newger?
I move to approve item 5N, memorandum of understanding with OPSI Local Number 159.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyer. Who do I hear second? Mr. Murray?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Item O for your consideration is the 21-22 school fees. There are no changes or no increases to school fees. Item P for your consideration is the special service agreements, and these are only used in extenuating circumstances like in lieu of transportation, those type of things which are commonly approved by the board or brought before the board. Item Q is an overnight and out-of-state trip request from North High School. This would be the North Choir and the North Marching Band to perform at Walt Disney World and Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida, as those are opening up. So we're taking the opportunity to travel there. Obviously, if for some reason it gets shut down, it gets shut down. But at this point, we're hoping that it doesn't. So this is to allow them to take this trip. It's also important to note that students pay for the cost of their own trip.
Great to be able to talk about that again.
It is wonderful. It feels normal.
Right.
Item R for your consideration is a salary revision. So essentially what had happened was someone had earned a master's degree. It wasn't communicated clearly, or somehow something was missed from the employee to the payroll department, and they were not paid for somewhere near 15 or 16 years, I believe the number was, of missing their additional pay for their master's degree. Yeah, maybe they were one of the people that didn't cash their check. I don't know, but
Oh, I mean,
it's
can you not
a
catch
large
it?
organization, and it sometimes happens. And I don't know who the mistake was on. I'm not going to say it was on the employee, but it very well could have been. I don't know for sure. But anyway, we only go back 6 years, so that's what's in our contract. So this is a refund, or making them whole for 6 years, not the entire 15 or 16 years. And then the personnel supplement is for the brass advisor, and that's been pulled out.
Do I hear a motion to approve item 5S, personnel supplemental for the brass advisor? Mr. Jones?
Mr. President, I motion to approve item 5S, personnel supplementals for brass advisor.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do we hear a second? Mr. Murray?
I'll second it.
Thank you very much. Do I hear any discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
I abstain.
Passes 4-0.
Dr. Thompson?
Item T for your consideration is the personnel agenda, and everyone that appears on that personnel agenda are available before board meetings and after board meetings. All persons are employed pending receipt of satisfactory records from the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, the Ohio Department of Education, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation before they become permanent employees of the school district.
Item 6A is a notification of our next regular meeting, which is on August 9th at 7 p.m. Here on the first floor, there will be Eastlake Board of Education located at 35353 Curtis Boulevard, Eastlake, Ohio. Item 7A is the adoption of the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion to approve item 7A?
Mr. President?
Mr.
I
Murray?
make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Do I hear a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do I hear discussion? Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
And item 8A, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Mr. Murray?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mrs. Newyear. Do I hear discussion? No. Mr. Charnello?
Mr. Murhart?
Yes.
Mr. Roskis?
Yes.
Mrs. Newyear?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
You're adjourned at 8:02 p.m.
Thank you very much for coming.